I'm joined by Tony Picon, who's the Managing Director of Colliers International in Rangoon. Tony, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
In an interview with CCTV last month, you were quoted as saying, when Thailand opened up, it was the best Western investors and Japanese investors. Now it's Singaporeans, Malaysians, Indonesians, and the oil and gas sector is big, as well as the tourism sector. And you said it's almost like the perfect storm. I wonder if you could elaborate on how Rangoon is like the perfect storm.
Well, I suppose you've got to look at it a little bit, not only Myanmar or Yangon. You've got to look at it that this is the 21st century now, and the world is a very different place to when Thailand began to open up in the 60s. Indonesia, Malaysia, even Vietnam and Cambodia opened up in the 90s. Again, you know, we hardly had any internet then. Mobile phones were just beginning. So Myanmar has opened up to a very different world. I think this is one of the interesting things that I've noticed in. So it's not only Myanmar, you've got to look at it as the global aspect to it. I think in the past, the first companies that entered Vietnam, Cambodia or Thailand in the 60s were the frontier market players to some degree. They were kind of used to dealing with these sort of markets. I think that the problem we find is that the foreigners often come to Myanmar. They come for the first time with very low expectations. Their expectations are reversed 180 degrees. When they meet government officials, they get a very good feeling about the country. They go back, they say, let's come to Myanmar. We're here, let's come over. And then they come for their second and third visit, and I think their perspective changes, because then they see the reality that it's a frontier market, and it's not going to change overnight. You know, the expectation that we're going to see Singapore tomorrow in Myanmar or Thailand or Indonesia or in Vietnam is very optimistic, and so we have to be patient. And I think that the government itself is beginning to realise this and realise that there has to be patience from all sides, and that the country will move. It's moving incredibly fast from where it began, but it's still not good enough for a lot of people, investors, and they have to be careful and they have to be patient with the way the country is opening up, and to allow it Myanmar time to understand the world as it is now. Because when the doors shut in '62, it was a very, very different world. And a lot of people, those doors have been shut for 50, 60 years.
Could you just go into a bit more detail about the challenges that businesses face in this frontier market?
You've got all different challenges. You have a financial system that is very weak at the moment. Again, there's been dramatic improvement from where it began 2 or 3 years ago. You know, the abolition of FECs, for example. You have infrastructure risk, the electricity obviously is an issue, especially for the industrial estates, because a lot of energy now is being transferred from industrial to residential. So that's affecting the industrial market, especially in the end of the dry season. So in the next few months you're going to start to see problems. Overall, doing business with Myanmar companies, a lot of them are traditional family concerns, and the decision making is very centralized, which really didn't matter in the early days. Now the need for speed, the need for information gathering makes it very difficult, because often the one person who makes the decision or even has the information is abroad, is very busy. And so it makes it very difficult for foreign companies to have a constant engagement with these companies that they're trying to work with as JV partners. And also that, you know, to some degree, Myanmar from Mars and foreigners from Venus, they're coming from two very different sort of attitudes and ideas, and it's going to take time for all that to come together. It's a beginning, the learning process is beginning, but again, it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to be a matter of years and even perhaps a generation.
You said about potential investors coming to look into the country and it not really meeting their expectations. What advice do you have to businesses coming into the country? What would they need to ask themselves before moving in?
Are they ready? The problem that we've found is that a lot of companies have come in and talked that they're coming to Myanmar. And it's not that the difference is are you ready to come to Myanmar, but you're not coming because you haven't found the right deal, you haven't found the right land, or you haven't found the right JV partner, or is it that you really genuinely are not ready to come to Myanmar? And I think you have to make a decision early on, after homework and investigation, and come in here, of whether your company it's the right time to come to Myanmar. And some companies have said no. We come in 10 years, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. And that's fine as long as you've made that decision. So it's not the right for everybody. And the frontier markets are not the best opportunities for all companies, especially those who are quite conservative, have shareholders to think about, who, often these are better markets for private funds who, are less accountable to shareholders, etc., who can make quicker decisions. So I think they have to look at themselves first. Investigate, research, come to the country, visit, talk to as many people as possible, but really look at yourself, the company look at itself and say, are we ready to come to Myanmar? And what is our experience of frontier markets? Have we come to Cambodia? Have we looked at Bangladesh? Have we looked at Laos, etc.? Are they engaged in those countries as well?
What are the risks for a business moving into Burma?
You have to find the right JV partner. I think do due diligence on your partner you're working with. There are plenty of good people to work with who may not be 100% for them, but you work together and you learn from each other. And I think there's a very good opportunity for very successful JVs going forward. But you have to go in the eyes wide open. You have to check on your due diligence for sanctioned parties. A lot of companies come in, don't realise that there are very strict sanctions still in effect, and multinationals still apply those sanctions. European companies will still go along with US sanctions for the sake of their North American market. So that's one very big area to consider, is who you're going to work with, because in most cases you're going to have to work with Myanmar companies, people. And so that has to be strongly considered. The other risks are the risks, really, the known unknowns, if you like. The infrastructure is going to be an issue, as we know. The capacity of the people is going to be an issue. You're going to see a need for skilled people in all different areas, and there's a lack of that skill. But there is a willingness. We saw this in Cambodia and Vietnam, and I think here there's a very strong willingness for people to move up quickly, and I can see that happening with the right training. But I think companies also have to do their part in capacity building as well, and the companies that Myanmar are trying to attract now due to its reform process are companies who do that, who create create training programs and better conditions for their employees. So companies can mitigate some of the risks by their own actions.
There's many foreign investors coming into the country that are looking for commercial space and also residential accommodation. Could you describe the state of the property market with regards to both of those?
Yeah, in terms of the, let's say, office market, we have about 50 to 60,000 square meters of supply, which is about, let's say, about 1% of Bangkok's supply. So it is incredibly small. And if you go around Southeast Asia, a lot of buildings, in one building there's more supply than the whole of Yangon, and we're way behind for where the market is going. So we will see eventually full occupancy, or more or less frictional occupancy, vacancy. So there'll be some movement according as rental rates go up, companies move out, other companies move in. In terms of supply of the office market, it's going to be quite lumpy. If you look at where demand is going to come from, a lot of companies are setting up now, but they're having 50 square meters or 100 square meters, so it's quite small because they're not actually fully operating. They may be effectively like representative offices, just checking the market, having a few local staff. What will change is government action. So each type of demand in many ways for office space comes initially from the green light from the government. So we saw a few months ago the telecom licenses with Ooredoo and Telenor and the telecommunications law. That opened up the market for the telecoms industry. Beforehand, there was hardly one in town. The oil and gas licenses are going to affect significantly the oil and gas companies, because if you don't win the license, you're not going to be here. And then it'll affect the oil and gas service providers like Halliburton, Schlumberger to come in. And then you have the banking, the insurance companies. Again, they're only setting up representative offices, which are relatively small because they're not doing any business here. Once you set up, say, wholesale banking licenses or retail banking licenses, again, the whole market will move. even manufacturers are waiting to some degree for Tilawa special economic zones. So once that gets rolling, then a lot of companies want to set up their head office probably in Yangon Centre, because you don't want all your office functions in the industrial estate. So again, that will move the market, but it will take government action each time, let's say, to have the green light for companies to move. Residential presents even more serious issues, I think, in the future, because there is an extreme lack of what we say international quality or reasonable quality service apartments. Again, compared to other countries, it's very low. And also we see very limited alternative accommodation. If you go to, say, Bangkok, a lot of accommodation, rental accommodation, is in pretty high quality condo units, which is extremely lacking in Yangon as well. So there are little alternatives to service apartments. So what we're noticing is actually a lot of foreigners are holding back from living in Yangon. They are living in, say, Bangkok. They're flying in regularly once a week, spending 3 or 4 days or longer in Yangon, and then flying back to Bangkok for the weekend. Their family is based in Bangkok. That's where you've got your international schools, your international hospitals. So if you have a family, a lot of people are choosing to remain in Bangkok. And I term them the half-pats. So half their time is spent in Thailand usually, and half the time is spent in Yangon. So there is a great demand, and there will be in the future, for smaller unit sizes service apartments or apartments for lease with good facilities, and which will be lacking for some time to come.
I mean, property prices have soared. They've more than tripled over the last few years. Some are more expensive than an apartment in New York City. What's fueling this property surge, the price surge?
To some degree, I think it's a little bit like, I equate it a little bit like gold. Gold is a great industrial metal, but only 10% of it is used as industrial metal because it's way too high priced. Where silver, 90% is used as industrial metal. So in effect, land is a little bit like gold, because gold is used as a storage of wealth, but also it becomes a little bit speculative as well, and that's what land has become in Myanmar. It's very limited options for people to store their wealth, and land becomes one of the safest. And so that really underpins the whole of the property market here. But not only for land, and also for condominium units as well, because they're also seen as another way of storing their wealth. So I can see it continuing, although it's difficult to say that, because there's no bubble. There's no speculative bubble that can burst, because there's no bank financing that underpins it. So if it does come down, it will have to come down by landowners. In order to do deals with foreigners, that price has to come down in some form. Now, what it will come down is in terms of setting up JV, joint ventures. And in order to set up a successful joint venture, that price will have to come down to a reasonable level. But it'll be done in a way in which the land is put into the equity of the joint venture. And then it will be up to the Myanmar people who own the land. Do you want to sit on your land and ask a price that is beyond reason for foreigners? Fine, they continue to do that. Or do you want to actually get involved in the real estate market? Do you want to do development? Do you want to be involved in the future of this country? Then you have to make perhaps tougher decisions.
Do you have a projection as to when the prices will sort of start to even out?
I think we're looking at two different price structures. If you're looking at the office, service apartment and hotel market, which is a foreign end user, that's really demand and supply, and I can see the high rates, high level of occupancy continuing for about another 8-9 years. A lot of developers are waiting until a satisfactory outcome to 2015 elections. I think that assuming that there will be a satisfactory outcome, that will mean a significant surge in investment after that period. And then it will take a year or more to acquire the land, or negotiate the land, and then 2 or 3 more years to construct. So you're looking at, say, 2019, 2020, before we probably see a rebalancing of the market, where you'll get a significant surge in supply and a readjustment, just as we saw in other markets. So The land price is a very different animal, if you like, a very different situation, because it's not really demand and supply. It's locals deciding that that's the land price, and there's no real mathematical way of the reasoning behind that price. It's just what locals think they can get for it, and one local sells it for that price, so everyone else thinks that they can get the same price, and that will take time to moderate. But it will be done on a case-by-case basis, because it's not going to all collapse again, but it's not it's not finance, so it's not going to collapse. It will just simply be almost shamed into going down. That if you're a local and you want to be part of this process, this new Myanmar, then you have to make a decision on your land price being reasonable. No, I don't mean cheap, ridiculously cheap, but reasonable for a foreigner to enter into a JV, joint venture to develop the property. Or they can just sit on it, and or unless there's government action that alters that, they can just sit on it, and you'll have people sitting on empty land plots probably for the next 20, 30 years, and buildings going on around them, and they'll probably might be quite happy because they don't need the money.
Are there any other property laws that you would like to see brought in?
I think a zoning. I mean, we need to know a clear understanding of the height restrictions in the city. I think that's been discussed, and I think that one aspect to it that is important is the role of the heritage buildings in the city, in the country as a whole. I think they're pivotal. I think they're very important in defining Yangon in the future, and I think we've got to do our utmost to preserve them and preserve what's around them as well, and to prevent them being sort of surrounded by large-scale office buildings. I think that's the key, and I think the Yangon Heritage Trust is doing a very good job in trying to protect those buildings. So I think that's one aspect to it. As far as the law, I think it's not so much the law; it's the rule of law, and having a clear roadmap. Whether it's it doesn't have to be the best law in the world, but it has to be a clear roadmap of how investors can lease property, how they can be involved in a JV. At the moment, we're still sort of struggling our way through the existing laws, and it's almost on a case-by-case basis of learning from actually going putting in investment and what is the outcome. But there is a bit of a lack of clarity. I think also one aspect to it, and not necessarily the law, but how land is tendered out has to be a lot more clearer, both the heritage buildings and land owned by the government. So I think if there has to be a lot of clarity on that would help the market. At the moment, nobody really knows.